It's an exciting time right now for Valley sports fans. The men's Final Four is in town, and NCAA President Charlie Baker is a busy man. We caught up with him on Arizona's family at East Lake Park for the NCAA's Heritage Project, helping restore the community center at 16th Street in Jefferson. And there's a long list of things to discuss with the NCAA president: gambling, NIL, conference realignment, a super league, and the future of the NCAA as a whole. The only thing that was off the table to discuss was pending litigation. A very interesting conversation with NCAA President Charlie Baker here on the Extra Point Podcast.
We are super grateful for your time today. I know it's very busy here, Final Four week, and you're very busy. As far as the Valley goes, we had the Final Four in 2017, and the NCAA is back. So I guess, are we now officially part of the rotation here?
I think the best part about being here is Phoenix is a city that knows how to run these kinds of events. I mean, we were talking earlier about the fact that Alabama won a national championship here playing football a few years ago, and here they are coming back to play basketball in this tournament. And I think people have always felt when they've come here for events, whether it was for this or for something else, that this is a great town to have this kind of an event in. You have some terrific colleges here, one of which just won a national men's swimming and diving championship. Congratulations to ASU. And for us, it's a process, and it's competitive, and there are a lot of people who want to do this. But the fact that over the course of 7-8 years, this will be your second time, it says a lot about the quality of the work that's done here in Phoenix.
How long is your to-do list here this week?
My to-do list is partially here, but it's also partially in Cleveland, where the women's championship is going on, but we also have the men's ice hockey championship going on, and the women just finished up. And what I would say is that we have a really good team, and the other thing we have that makes a big difference is we have a lot of schools who really put their shoulder to the wheel on this stuff too.
Gambling has been a hot topic that you've discussed recently with the prop bets. So as we look at the hot topics right now in college sports, I guess let's start there. In prop bets, you've come out and trying to discourage any type of prop bets and some sort of legislation against it, and get the schools and the conferences to join you. So how do you go about trying to protect student athletes and the integrity of this with the new nature of sports where gambling is such a part of it?
Well, I was announced on this position in December of 22, and I started in March of 23, so I've been at it for about a year. During that window, and long after, all the way through my first year, the whole question about harassment and bullying, especially online, but also from the stands, it's been directed at student athletes. It's just one of the things that came up over and over and over in my conversations with student athletes. And most of it was around betting, and it was especially around individual performance of a student athlete where somebody bet X and Y happened. The other thing the kids talked about was their classmates and schoolmates sort of nudging them a bit to give them some idea about how they were going to do in the game coming up. And that's the kind of stuff that when I was playing sports in college, it was just what you talked about around the dining hall. Now it's become currency. And so the message I was getting over and over again from the student athletes was, you got to do something about this. And the good news is, of the 38 states plus or minus that have legalized sports betting, just about half of them at this point did not legalize or don't permit prop betting on college sports. And my role is to try to make sure we get the other half into the same place, because it's very clear to me that this puts tremendous pressure socially and otherwise on student athletes. You wouldn't believe the social media traffic that gets directed at them by people who don't get what they want out of them. And I also think the integrity of the game is an important issue. We're talking about kids here, all right? I mean, some of the bullying on social media is so bad that we actually hired a company to survey all the social media traffic that's being directed at coaches and officials and players during most of our major championships. And if they see stuff in there, which they do virtually every time, that's incredibly negative, they will notify the platforms and ask the platforms to shut those people down. And in some cases, they see stuff that's scary enough that they notify the authorities. And I'm really pleased with some of the momentum we have on this. A lot of people seem to get why this is not the right thing to do when it comes to student athletes, and it's my hope that if we can't eliminate it, we can certainly dramatically reduce the amount of prop betting that's going on in college sports.
It's fitting you're in Arizona. I think you've called NIL the Wild West, or the current state of college sports the Wild West. So is it possible to level the playing field when it comes to NIL? What's the next step here to kind of rein in some of the chaos we've seen?
Well, one of the things we don't have is any kind of traditional framework regulatorily. And so we actually have a consumer protection set of reforms that are moving through our own governance process. A uniform standard contract, which in any other financial sector in society, there's a uniform standard financial contract. Something that's going to look like TripAdvisor for student athletes, but what it's going to be is a site where the kids can post and their families can post on who was a good third-party agent and who wasn't. Who misrepresented who they were actually working for, who lied to them, who did a good job for them. Kids really need to know, and so do their families, who the bad actors are in this space and who the people who are playing by the rules and trying to do the right thing by the kids. And in addition to that, also creating what we're thinking of as kind of a warehouse of data and information around what NIL deals look like. It won't be specific deals, but it will give kids and families some idea about if you're playing basketball, or you're a volleyball player, or you're playing softball, or you're playing football. This is sort of what the market looks like for somebody like you, because the big issue most of the kids and families talk to us about is just no visibility in the way a traditional market works into what anybody's worth or what people get paid or how it works. And I think many of those reforms will help a lot. The other thing we're going to try and do is see if we can give schools a little more latitude to talk to kids about this stuff and to help them make good decisions, because I'm all in for kids doing really well under NIL. It's a great thing. Totally in on that. But you hear enough from enough kids and families about the problems that come with no transparency and accountability, and I do think many of these reforms, which I think of as consumer protections, will help make the space a lot safer for them, which is really what we're trying to do here.
So do you think that the student athletes then should be employees of the university, or is there another delineation there? Is there another way to separate that?
All of the student athlete leadership groups at the NCAA and most of the ones at the conference level don't want to be employees. They absolutely want to be, especially at the higher resourced institutions, they would like to be compensated for their time and their participation. But practically nobody wants to flip the dynamic around what I'm really there for. Remember, even at the highest and most prestigious institutions, the number of kids that are going to play professionally is really small, like less than 5%. So most of them need to figure out what they're going to get the degree in, how they're going to launch, and what they're going to do for the rest of their life. So the kids that we've talked to and the kids who serve on our leadership committees have all basically said, we want to be students first and athletes second. And we believe there are ways to compensate them for that. We probably need some help from Congress on that. But even there are a lot of people in what I call the collegiate space who would like to figure out a way to do more for the student athletes in the most elite programs. But even a lot of the student athletes don't want to suddenly be more focused on their sport and less focused on the fact they got to get a degree and figure out what they're going to do for the rest of their life. The sport was always the vehicle that got them into college in the first place. And I think for a lot of them, they'd like to stay there. And the other thing to think about here is you have 1,100 schools in the NCAA, okay? You have a handful that actually make money on sports. And the vast majority of them spend less than $25 million on sports. And an employment model for virtually all of those schools would basically mean either getting out of the sports business completely or dramatically scaling back the number of sports they make available, because they lose money on it now. And most of those schools across at least Division I and Division II offer academic and athletic scholarships to students. Division III, all the scholarships that are offered are based on financial need. They have nothing to do with whether you play a sport or not.
Are we trending towards a situation where the big-time college football and basketball might break off from the NCAA, or will there be a separate league?
I proposed, as a working paper last fall, I proposed the idea of creating kind of a separate tier for those top 60, 70 schools, which, if the average amount people are spending is somewhere in the 20s on their $20 million on college sports, and they're all spending like north of 140 or 150. It's just a different operating model. And in my mind, that should be dealt with separately. We should organize that separately. And I proposed a higher tier for those schools, and a lot of self-governance as part of that process. And that's currently working its way through the NCAA's sort of rulemaking process.
What's the evolution of the NCAA here? Is it as much enforcement and rules? Is it more hosting the events? What does the NCAA look like in the next 10, 20 years here?
Boy, I sometimes wonder what the NCAA will look like next week. I guess what I would say is that I think there's no question that there needs to be some sort of tiering, right? We already have Division I, Division II, and Division III, but the separation within Division I between those top 60 or 70 schools and the rest of Division I is very significant, and there should be separation there. I think everybody thinks the NCAA does a pretty good job on championships, and it's certainly the thing. If you talk to student athletes and say to them, what do you value most about the NCAA? You know, they will say, the thing I value most is the chance to test my mettle, and for my teammates and I to test our mettle against schools and conferences from other parts of the country in an NCAA championship. You know, they love that, and we should do everything we can to preserve it. It's a beautiful thing. And I certainly think the rulemaking stuff, because of NIL and some of these other issues, should really be more about protecting student athletes and a little less about some of the other stuff. The NIL rules we're looking for are all about consumer protection. The prop bet stuff is all about protecting student athletes. The stuff we're doing with the holistic student athlete model around scholarship guarantees is about protecting student athletes. The injury insurance protection program we're putting in place for 2 years after you graduate. If you get hurt when you're playing and you're still in treatment when you leave school, that takes effect in August, and that applies to all the kids across all 3 divisions. I think that ought to be our primary focus. What are the things in this new world that we can and should be doing to support student athletes going forward, and take seriously some of these issues around betting, social media, injury protection, health and well-being. We have a whole new set of guidance out on mental health supports. Yeah, I think that, and making sure that every kid who plays in a championship has a wonderful experience because of it.
Do you feel like conference realignment is done? Do you expect any more movement there?
Hard to tell. I mean, the thing people forget about on conference realignment is the total number of 18-year-olds in this country is dropping a lot and has been dropping since 2010. So some of the realignment, everybody says it's about the TV money, and some of it is, no doubt, okay, and about football, especially at those top-level schools that people know and pay attention to. But there's been a lot of realignment elsewhere in D1 and D2 and D3, and a lot of that has been about dealing with the reduction in the college-age population, which basically requires schools and conferences to start thinking differently about how they're organized, what sports they offer, and how they figure out how to make the math work, when you literally have like a 25% reduction in the number of kids who are even available to go to your schools, which is what's been happening since 2010.
Wow, that's incredible.
No one talks about it.
Right. I mean, do you expect that trend to continue?
It looks like it's probably going to, although the steepness of it will probably get a little less. And it's basically a function of immigration and birth rates.
If that's going down, but you are seeing women's sports, especially the women's basketball tournament we saw the other night, and you saw the numbers with the I-1 US, the I-1 LSU, yeah, better than the World Series, better than the NBA Finals. How do you expect women's sports trajectory to continue and to look here in 5 to 10 years?
Look, I think women's sports are in a great place and are only going to get more so. The people have talked about, and they should, the LSU Iowa rematch and Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and all the rest. 12 million on ESPN on a Monday night. Okay, this wasn't even on ABC, NBC, or CBS. This is ESPN. You got to pay to watch ESPN, right? What people don't talk about is 7 million people also watched UConn and Paige Bucher and USC and Juju Watkins play in the next game. And I think we had the biggest TV audience and the biggest attendance we've ever had at the Women's Volleyball Championship in Tampa. Women's gymnastics had the biggest audience they've had in a very long time last year, and I fully expect they will again this year. Softball which is played in Oklahoma City. That's their version of the trip to Omaha that the boys talk about, men talk about on the baseball side. They had their best TV numbers and huge attendance. They had to build new seats in the stadium there to accommodate the growth of that sport. Look, I think one of our jobs as a community, the NCAA plus the schools, is to do everything we possibly can to continue to elevate women's sports. The NCAA has invested a lot of money in women's basketball over the last 3 or 4 years, and at the end of the day, it's all about the students and the coaches and the schools. But there are things that we can all do collectively and collaboratively to continue to invest in those sports, and it makes a difference. Nebraska made a decision to invest in volleyball at the high school level and at the collegiate level, okay? And State of Nebraska and the University of. And they got 92,000 people on a 90-degree day. I was there. It was hot in Nebraska to watch the University of Omaha and University of Nebraska play volleyball against each other in the football stadium. This is the largest attended women's sporting event ever. There's a lot of great stuff going on.
The Extra Point Podcast is a production of 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.